All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Jake Swanson, and I'm a program coordinator at the U.S. Energy Association on the Energy Utility Partnership Program based in Washington, D.C. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and all participants are muted with their video turned off. You're welcome and encouraged to post questions either in the chat box or the Q&A box below. I will be monitoring them and passing them on to our presenters as appropriate. To give a brief background on USEA, we're a nonprofit membership organization of private and public energy related organizations, corporations, and government agencies. USEA represents the broad interests of the U.S. energy sector by increasing the understanding of energy issues both domestically and internationally through capacity building activities and events like this one. This series of webinars is financed through our cooperative agreement with USAID, the Energy Utility Partnership Program, and in particular through USAID's Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment, E3 Bureau. This is the 9th webinar in our series on digitalization and cybersecurity. You can find past recordings of our webinars on our website at usea.org/events. And if you click on the past event page at the bottom, you'll see the link to the recording and the presentations. Please join us in the coming weeks as we cover other areas of cybersecurity to work to strengthen the security and reliability of electric utilities. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Jamila Amodio from the U.S. Agency for International Development, who will make some brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Jake. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to part 2 on cybersecurity standards for the energy sector. This is part of the Business Innovation Partnership Program implemented in partnership with the U.S. Energy Association. The Business Innovation Program will support utilities' ability to adapt to innovations in technology by increasing customer expectations, changing government oversight, and also encourage new business models and business process improvements. I am Jamila Amadeo. I'm with U.S. Energy, United States Agency for International Development, Energy Division, that is Global Division. Starting with our webinar presentation from last week, we are continuing our journey into standards, and today I join Jake and all of you in welcoming our presenters, Stefano Bracco and Christian Gabi. If you attended last week's presentation on the North American Electric Reliability Corporation Critical Infrastructure Protection NERC-CIP standards, you might remember that one of the questions posted in that chat was why not just use ISO 27001 standards. We anticipated this question from our audience and partners from all parts of the world, and we actually invited the leading experts who can talk to you in detail about the standard. I have the privilege of collaborating with Stefano Bracco since 2017 through the USAID Europe and Eurasia Energy Sector Cybersecurity Initiative Regional Regulatory Working Group meeting. I'm glad to have him with us today. Given the complexity of business processes and the wide variety of cyber assets in the energy sector, there's a long list of cybersecurity standards, which we will not be able to cover in detail, but we will inevitably touch upon in the remaining 6 webinars, as we'll have experts presenting on the data protection, supply chain, industrial control systems, SCADA, prudent investments, and incident response, planning, collaboration, and communication. Following these webinar series, USAID and USEA will host 3 industry panels where leading US firms will tell us more about the latest trends in cybersecurity products and services. To quote Stefano, we want to enable our partners to create a better ecosystem from a cybersecurity perspective, and we want you to hear firsthand from private companies that are working in this field. So as always, I encourage you to ask questions to our presenters, and also please write to Jake, to his email, which you can find in the registration page for this webinar, what cybersecurity issues and your company or yourself would like to hear and discuss further. and we'll try to invite those vendors. With that, I would like to thank both Stefano and Christian for presenting with us today. Thank you all for joining us, and Jake, back to you.
Thank you, Jamila. So this webinar, in conjunction with last week's cybersecurity webinar, kind of presents a mini series on the most commonly used cybersecurity standards in the power sector. Today, we have the pleasure of having two presenters from Europe. First, we have Stefano Bracco from the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, ACER, and Christian Gabi of Enology EON, who will not only walk us through the standards, but also share lessons learned from the utility perspective. Stefano Bracco is the knowledge manager in the corporate services at the Agency for Cooperation of Energy Regulators. Among his functions, he is also a senior security officer and chief information security officer since the founding of the agency. He has been working in EU institutions and bodies for the past 20 years, focusing on implementation of policies in different areas. He's been a researcher and a co-author of papers and books published in peer-reviewed international journals, covering several topics, including cybersecurity, energy, nuclear energy, and several other. He has extensive knowledge of energy cybersecurity in Europe. He is the chairman and co-chairman of task forces focusing on cybersecurity for energy from a regulatory perspective, and members of the expert group 2 of the Smart Grid Task Force of the European Commission. Stefano is joining us today from Italy. And I will also introduce our second speaker, Christian Gabi, who is the head of security for network and infrastructure at Enology SE, one of the largest distribution network operators in Europe. She's been dealing with security related issues in the utility industry for 15 years. Christian works for various industrial and energy industry associations and is involved in the European Union projects and is an active member of the German delegation of ISO IEC JTC1 SC27. Through her experience, she has in-depth knowledge of the strategic approach to standards development, practical implementation, and certification issues in the energy industry. Before she started her professional career, she completed studies in mechanical engineering and computer science. She joins us today from Essen, Germany, where the headquarters of Enology EON is located. So with that, I will pass it over to Stefano, and I will let you kick off the webinar. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you to USAID and to USCA. I start sharing my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see them, Stefano.
Fine. Okay, let's start then. This is usually what I see every time I start talking about the ISO 27001. This is the face of most of my colleagues and most of the people who are around. The reason why they make this face and why they look so scared is that many of them just don't know what is about, and this is why we thought that this would have been a good chance to explain just in 1 hour what is about and what does it mean in practice. I have the pleasure to have with me Christiane Gapp. She's one of the leading people for ISO 27001, and she is working with ISO as well. Working with ISO means that she is one of the contributors, so she is one of those who is contributing to make the standards. But I will come back to this later. One thing that you may want to know is that the ISO 27001, it's still not an obligation in all Europe, but obviously in the past years we have been discussing when we were setting up the network code on cybersecurity, if that would have been a standard to be used. And it's still under discussion, but I think that Christiane would tell you something more later. Let's move on with the topics. Today I want to go just through the basics. I want you to understand which are the practices, which is the systematic approach towards certification, meaning that we talk about 27001, but there is a full set of certifications and of standards you may use. I want to explain you how it works with certification, what does it mean in practice, and how you can get it. And then I would answer to some very uncomfortable questions by the end of this session, that are those questions that usually no auditor would like to answer. But I will do it. By the way, I'm a lead auditor, also a lead implementer for ISO 27000. So I have seen it both sitting from the side of the implementer and the side of the person who is going to check. And I just finished an audit on one of the national regulators yesterday evening. So I'm just fresh from one audit. Let's move on. First, let's take a few pills of ISO 27001. When you have to do all things for ISO 27001, what you have to do is basically to complete all these steps. We have 8, and you have to complete each of them, so you cannot skip any of them. Now, 8 steps, and with those names looks like a lot of things, but they are not, I can tell you. It would take time, but you would know better your own organization. I want just to walk a few minutes through all these things right now so that you better understand. Okay, first, you need to make sure that your management is supporting you. And this is pretty funny because people never take it seriously, but it's one of the most important things. ISO puts into the standard all these things. Talking about the standard, you would be curious to know how many pages is the standard. We are talking about 30, 35 pages right now. And if you are curious to know, it costs 120 euros roughly here in Italy. So it means you need to invest some money. Those money just go to the organization, and the organization sets the committees. Moving forward, step 2. For ISO 27001, you have to define which is the scope of what will be an audit. That is one of the compulsory steps if you want to take a certificate. So you need to analyze which are the processes that you want to put in scope, which are the systems, and also the services you would like to consider. Being a utility, I make always an example. If I would be a DSO, most probably I would not put billing in the scope of my own business. First, because it's true, it's an important aspect. But second, my core work, my core job is just to deliver energy. So most probably what I would put is all the processes that bring me just to distribute energy if I'm a DSO. Just to make you a very simple example. Then we have to run a risk assessment. This shows you that ISO 27001 risk-based. It's not prescriptive. You don't have a list of things you have to do and not the way you have to do. You just have to analyze your own risks, to assess them, and then to apply controls in the way you prefer in order to mitigate those risks. Next step is obviously you need to have a risk treatment plan. You have to define it. And then you have to have the statement of applicability. That is basically the main link between the risk assessment and the risk treatment in an enterprise. This is very important. It shows you basically where you have chosen to implement information security controls among those 114 controls that are listed in the standard. And yes, the standard has an annex called the Annex A that contains all the controls that you should put in place in order to fulfill the requirements. Coming to the end, you have the risk treatment plan documents. You have to put them on paper. So some of these things must be really on paper and cannot just be told to an auditor. You need to implement the controls, and then you can move to the monitoring phase of the ISMS. And this is the last part. I think that in 3-4 minutes, I managed to tell you more or less what is there. This is just what is in the standard itself, meaning that this is really the index of the standard. But I want to highlight a few things. First, The importance of the context and of the organization. When you approach ISO 27001, you need to know the context in which you work, meaning not only the market in which you operate, energy for me, for example, but also the legal constraints and everything that would influence the decisions that you would take in respect to the risks that are created by the threats. And this is pretty important. People always concentrate on technical measures and they never concentrate on legal and compliance obligations. This is an important step, and it's at the beginning of the process. Leadership, you need to have somebody who would lead this process and somebody who would clearly mark which are the objectives and the purpose of all this. It's not defined by ISO. ISO would not tell you that as a TSO or DSO you have to do something, but will tell you that you need to have somebody that would show leadership and set all things. You need to have policies. Policies may be very short. It doesn't need to be hundreds of pages. In the EU institutions, we are famous for having 100 pages for one single policy. I've seen policies that are just 1 or 2 pages, and they just contain the main principles on which you are basing your own security posture. Then you need to have good planning. Resources are another important thing that auditors would always check. Do you have enough resources just to complete this plan? Meaning, do you have enough people? Do you have enough money? And do you have competencies and skills? And then do you have an awareness program that would make others aware of what you are doing and how they are supposed to behave after you have all the system in place? All these things will be checked by an auditor, obviously. Moving forward, and this is the continuation of the slide before, we have other things. There are some information that must be documented, and just because for security reasons, they need to stay somewhere. We will see later that there are different ways to document things. Another important fact in the ISO is that ISO obliges you to improving time after time. And this is extremely important, especially when you will have the second round of audits, meaning that this would be important when you will first certify the first time, but the second time it will be a core point in which the auditors will check you. An improvement means that in respect to previous, you must have set clear targets and you need to be able to show that your information security posture is better than before. And you can do it with several ways. Still, it's left to you the way you do all this. And then this must be continuous. We just said it. Now, somebody would ask me which version of ISO 27001, 2005 or 2013. It doesn't really matter. The main point is that when you have ISO, what you get from the website of ISO is the last release. And generally, it is the one that has improved since the previous ones. So if I need to give you a suggestion, I would tell you just take the last one that is offered to you on the ISO website or by your own contractor or by your own consultant. And just to give you one small information, between the version 2005 and 2013, there were just less controls. This doesn't mean that it was worse than 2013. It means that they just removed some controls that were ambiguous. On the other side, they added and they joined some controls that had to stay together. And the other interesting part was that they moved from 11 to 14 domains. That is another interesting fact. Basically, it means just that they just reorganized knowledge in a way that could have been understood much better. If you wonder why people are still using sometimes the 2005, I can tell you that it's just a matter of opportunity and a matter of convenience. I have seen in organizations that they were using the old standards simply because they couldn't change to the last one because it would have created too many problems and they needed some time to have a transition. And it is something that in future you may consider as well. Now we go through the systematic approach. We talk about ISO 27001, but I would not stop there. ISO is a system. It's more than a simple and unique standard. And I want to go directly to the toolbox. And I want to explain to you a couple of things, okay? Okay, then I want to take my ISO 27001 certification, and I took the levels. Then I want first to understand how they will run my own audit. To understand this, I need to look to the ISO 19011. That basically is about guidelines for auditing management systems. That document, that standard, contains basically the way that it will be run all the audit of your ISO 27001. The audit of 27001 as an Annex A, I just said it before, right? But sometimes people struggle understanding which are and how they should be implemented, those controls. Well, if you want to dig into that, the best document you can have is the ISO 27002. There is another point. I talk about risk management, right? Then, okay, fine. You want to understand something more in respect to the 30 pages you want to dig into. In that case, I would strongly suggest that you would take the ISO 27005. And in that, basically, you would find all about information security risk management. Now, if you need to have something a bit more general, because utilities sometimes are a bit different in terms of information security, just think that you have OT and IT at the same time, and you want still to run a risk assessment following certain principle, I would suggest to go for ISO 31000. That is basically guidelines of risk management. Finally, you want to dig in another direction, basically vertically into what the utility should do. Well, that is something pretty recent, is the 27019. That is the standard related to information security controls for the energy utility industry. And you would wonder, and I really encourage you just to take those standards and to read them. Basically, if you would take the 27019, you would have just parts that would recall the 27002 and the 27001 and would tell you how you should consider that in the scope of a utility. And this is pretty interesting. One last I want to mention is the 22301, that is about business continuity. And I'm mentioning because especially in terms of business continuity, the 27001 can be limited. And we saw it during the pandemic that all companies that were just using also the 200301 basically got a lot of benefits because we're bit better prepared in respect to those who were just certified on 27001. Now, it's easy for me to say, I've read all of them, I've been working with them, but just to say, don't just stop to the 27001. You will see that there is much more to read and to understand, and there is something specific for you that would help you really to dig into. More you read and more you understand the system. Now, moving forward, first step for implementing cybersecurity through ISO is basically to decide what you want to achieve, what you want to cover, the scope, the level of deepness, and what you want to take out of this. I don't think that the certification is a good excuse to have ISO 27001. I think you should really have an aim to have a culture for security at the end of this journey. You can select your tools and you need to select the right tools. I show you the showcase so you can go through that, and if you need, you can contact me after and I would point you to what may be better. There are controls and they are all equally important, but there are also specific guidelines for utilities and they are written clearly and you can take them and apply. Obviously, you need also to consider which are your own risks. Auditors act themselves as standards. So more you know about standards, more you will be able to interact and cooperate with them when you will have an audit and when you will be close to a certification. And now we move exactly in that direction. ISO 27001 on the end can be complex, but it's complex only if you do not really understand what does it mean if you don't have any guidance. If you have never studied about it, just start from today and read bit of it every day, you would learn a lot. And I am telling you because I had the same journey. I had to just to learn by myself. Don't think to ISO 27001 as a tick-the-box approach and as a one-shot. That is not going to work. You will just get the certification, and I'm sure that most of you would achieve, but at the end of the day, your company will not be more secure. Before using it, just try to understand the general philosophy of ISO, that is even more important than simply the ISO 27001, and then dig into the standard. Now, certification. This is the most scary part of everything. When I use the word certification in my office, people, they just ask me, what does it mean? And who is going to come here to check what we are doing and why? Okay, certification will get just if you will pass through the process of an audit. And there is no better definition than the one in the ISO 19011. And I'm saying, and just to demonstrate what I said a few minutes ago, it's just an audit, it's just a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine to the extent possible to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. And that's it. You don't need to know anything else about it. By the way, all you have seen now between ISO 19011 and ISO 27001 will take you more or less a full week of training. So be prepared if you want to go through it and if you want to be a lead implementer or a lead auditor. The auditor, first, is not an inspector, is not a referee, is just somebody who got a certification himself or herself and has been studying the ISO 19011 and the 27001. Is a certified professional, is specific for that domain. Usually auditors are specific for domains, so I can work just on energy and on nuclear, but nuclear is not included in ISO. This you have to know. So if you want to certify on ISO 27001 on nuclear systems, you cannot do that. There is a specific IEC standard, and this is written in the ISO 27001. And auditors are there to help, and they are not to take a position against you or in favor of you of your management. There is a relationship between the utility and the auditor, and you need to be careful when you have this relationship. First, the auditor is focused on the scope of your own audit. He will or she will not focus on anything else. Will not provide you with any judgment, but he will just check that you comply through the evidences that you have prepared and that you are able to show. Is focused on what you did, what you documented, and on the way they are solid and robust, all the evidences you have created. He can offer, or she can offer, additional pair of eyes. And believe me or not, all the audits I went through, the auditors came with very good suggestions, simply because many of the auditors have seen how others have implemented and can bring you a value added. And one main point when you go through the certification, never become confrontational with an auditor. If you try simply to do that, you will just lose the battle. And you will lose simply because the auditor is not there to stop you. And if he's making you remarks, he's just doing that because he wants you to fulfill something in which he believes that there is the truth. It's a bit like a religion. Whatever you want, you would not convince people to have another religion. And this is just in the mindset of the people and of the auditors. And by the way, other big point, Jamila said before that on the previous webinar, we had Tim and Dean talking about NERC-CIP. This is not about a standard word. You can use whatever standard until you do something. And this, I want to make it clear. For us, it's important that we are doing this because we believe that this is important for the security of the energy sector and for the cybersecurity of the energy sector. Okay, the audit process, first you will have a preliminary visit. This is not strictly compulsory, but I would say that it's something you have to do. You will have an audit certification visit. It will take several days. It can be planned. Then you have a recertification visit, a surveillance visit. If you are curious to know how much does it cost, I asked to a couple of companies. They told me that it may cost between 15,000 and 20,000, around those prices. But it depends also on the size of your own company, on the number of sites that you have, on the scope. It can depend on a lot of factors. But let's say the price is really something that I assume that many companies may afford, and it depends also on your local market. It is really needed. Well, I would say that when people ask me if it's needed, I always say it depends, meaning that you can be compliant with ISO 27001, and you may be even better than a company that is certified, but it depends on you. And it depends also on the requirements in terms of compliance. Cristiane will explain you better, so I don't want to say anything more about this. What happens after? Or you win or you lose. And this is the sad truth. Basically, you can take and you can pass the certification, or you may not do it. At the end of the day, if you pass it, you will take this page of paper with the name of your company, and more or less it's exactly the same as this one. This doesn't mean that you have finished. It means that you have started and you had a good start, but you have to continue, because the certification have to be renewed, and because you have a system in place, and simply you have just started, and the way you started was a good start. And it means also that you know quite well your own business and the way you have to secure your own business and your own information. Also, it doesn't mean that if you didn't get it, you did right or wrong. It means simply that you tried your own way to do the certification. I've seen both people failing and people taking the certification. And I must say, I was most of the times on the side of those who didn't take it, just because I knew that somebody would have paid the price at the end. And on this, I want just to leave you a message. First, if you lose, never argue with an auditor. It's the decision of a team, by the way. An auditor, you have a lead auditor and you have two other people. So you have a team that would judge you. Do not fire your chief information security officer. This I've seen so many times in my entire life that I would say that I would really like that this would stop. If you didn't pass the certification, you need first to go, and you need to understand what happened. A negative result is just a way to improve to the next stage. If you lose, as I said, ask for explanations to the auditor. Auditors will explain you with very good words what happened and why they think that you do not fulfill all the requirements that are set by the standard. Plan to redo the work and ask to your chief information security officer what was missing and what went wrong. He is the best one who can tell you. And there is no other one in the company that would tell you. Management doesn't understand about information security. Your chief information security officer is the only one who understands what happened and what he may also have done wrong, because we are all humans. Try to build an information security culture. Anyway, this is just the most important thing, and it must be the bottom line of all this. Okay, ISO 27000 doesn't mean a lot of things. First, it means that you understand your business and your risks. This I already said. It means that you have a method to manage those risks, and that your company is conscious of what is there and how you run your own business. ISO 27000 also means that I can set and execute a complex plan for information security. Just think that an ISO 27001 to be prepared may take you up to a year. And then it means a lot of other things. I've listed them here, but I don't want to take time to Cristiane now. Okay. First, ISO 27000 certification will be useless if it's just a legal requirement. If you are doing that just because you must comply with the law, well, just think twice. You are investing money, you will comply, but would you really gain something? if you do it properly, it can take short or long time, but anyway, you will really gain something. If you want to do this, there are value added in a lot of steps. First, if you don't understand, if you want to be guided, just hire a consultant. This is possible. Hire a consultant that would prepare the certification papers. That I would not really suggest. You should do it by yourself or with the help of a consultant. You can also hire a certification body to obtain an ISO 27000 certification, but also think about ethics. If utilities would just copy paste from others, avoiding to assess and mitigate the real information security risks, would just waste their own time, meaning that it's very important that you run into this exercise, and it's no more than an exercise that takes a year. Utilities should not avoid to assess and mitigate their own risks. And many people just going through the certification and using a tick the box approach exactly avoid that. Common mistakes. First, standards come also with glitches and vulnerabilities, and it's possible always to have improvements. And standards are done for people and by people that develop those standards over time. And it's important that you understand, not even ISO 27001 is perfect. This is why it's revised, and this is why it's revised on a, let's say, stable grounds. Auditors are people as well. They assess and they try to understand what you did. An auditor may give you a fake certification, but if they give you a fake certification because you managed to convince them, you are just a company that is at risk specifically in that moment in which you get the certification. In case you do a good job, you will receive a well-deserved certificate that not only will prove that you passed all the steps, but you understood how to keep it running. You understood that you live in a market, and that certificate will have a completely different value from a fake one. Standards cover specific areas with different levels of details, but you know the way you use them. If you do not like ISO, we respect also this. And I said it before, we always have this discussion with team and all people from using NERC SIP until you do something. Because at the end of the day, you can be certified against whatever standard. And this is the most important thing. And the certification is just a mean to prove that you did it. And finally, why we use ISO? Because ISO is most of the times something that belongs to everybody. I wrote it, we are ISO. Each nation can contribute to ISO. You will hear from Christian about that. Each expert can make it better any ISO standard. I may apply to be in the committees that do ISO standards, and you can do the same in your own country. So you can be part of the system. ISO basically it's not a tick the box. You have to do some work before you can achieve anything. And you can trust those who have ISO certification. And with this, I'm not promoting ISO as such. I'm saying because I've been testing on my own skin and I've been participating to ISO meetings. I think that now I will stop. I will give the floor to Christian or to Jake.
Thank you, Stefano. That was a great overview. And I know you've worked a lot with the certification process. And I think what you said is really important in doing the certification for the right reasons. So thank you for your insights. Christian, I'll pass it over to you now.
Thank you, Stefano. To be honest, 12 years ago, when my former boss reached out to me and told me that I have to perform an ISO certification for our former IT, I looked exactly like the person.
Christian, you're kind of going in and out. Could you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
Come any closer? Hopefully now it works.
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Perfect. Okay. I told Stefano that I looked exactly like the guy on the first picture of his presentation when my former boss reaches out to me and told me that I have to perform an ISO certification for our former IT. So I can feel it that some people may be a bit overwhelmed by the whole ISO complex. So it was a very nice overview, and now I'd like to give you an overview on the cybersecurity regulations and landscape that we do have in the European Union. Can you see my screen? I hope so. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. The leading and for all member states of the EU binding document here is the Directive on Security of Information Systems. It's the so-called NIS directive. It was published in 2016 by the EU Parliament, and it had to be transposed into national laws of each member state until May 2018. So it's pretty fresh. And I listed up the main content, which is all binding for the states of the European Union. It is the mandatory cert for every country, a stronger information sharing and cooperation between all member states regarding incidents and risks. And as well, and this is an important point, the identification of the country's operators of essential services and set up security measures for them. So as my company is located with its headquarters in Essen, Germany, I'd now like to share some experiences with you how the implementation of the NIS looks like for a grid provider in a European country like we do have in Germany. And we do have some experiences right now also with the certification, and I think this is a more practical approach to the certification topic. First of all, the first step we had to do in Germany was identifying the operators of essential services. And the Ministry of Internal Affairs identified sectors that are essential for the country, like, for example, health, food, water, and for sure also energy. And but when it comes to the concrete definition, if a company is an operator of essential services, it is pretty clear that even if food is a critical sector defined by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, not every small supermarket is an operator of essential services as well. And therefore, clear thresholds are defined in the so-called Kritisverordnung we do have. I've done a screenshot and translated it into English as far as I could. It's just a small part of the Kritisverordnung, where you can see that it contains calculation criteria and reasons why those criteria had been chosen. I can also share the link to the Kritisverordnung for everyone who's interested in. But for gas and electricity grid providers, we do have a different regulation in Germany. Based on some really bad experiences the government made during a large blackout we had in Germany in the area of Münsterland, which is a more rural area, in 2005, all grid providers for gas and electricity become operator of essential services and had to follow a strong guideline of catalogs. What does it mean for Germany? That was first of all a shock for us. For the TSOs, it's pretty simple. In Germany, we do have 4 large TSOs, 50 Hertz, Tenet, Amprion, Transnet BW. But we do have 819 DSOs and 726 gas grid providers of all sizes and located in all the different areas, in rural ones, in cities. And so this was not easy to manage because now we have more than 1,000 companies that fall under those requirements of the NIS directive. Pretty much to do for us. And then the question came up, how can we assure that all those different operators of essential services are complying to minimum baseline of IT security? It was not that easy. I already told you about the NIS directive and the things we put it into our national laws. So in Germany in 2015, the IT security law was published, an article law that changes many of the existing laws. Also the Energiewirtschaftsgesetz, which is the German energy law. And that again follows the IT security catalog of our regulator, the BNetzA. And there, while this was issued, there were many things we had to fulfill as a grid operator. A lot of things. First of all, I was like, yay, only 16 pages, written in large letters. That can't be much, but there were very strict requirements in this catalog, also hidden in those 16 pages. Let's have a closer look. So what's in this IT security catalog? The first thing was just to nominate a contact person. This was a quick win, pretty easy. This was for the official contact person who can give an overview about current things and current issues that are in place. It was pretty easy. We had to deliver a structured grid plan, which was also very easy because this is somehow our daily business. But the third point, and when we come back to Stefano's presentation, was that every TSO and DSO in Germany, all the over 1,000 ones, have to be certified by ISO 27001 and 27019, the information security controls for energy, utility industry, and have to be regularly recertified. And we had a 3-year transition period to fulfill that thing, which ended in 2018. So nowadays in Germany, when you come here, every grid provider will be certified under those standards. Okay. Now I tried to answer the questions raised in the introduction of the webinar and tried to fill up with some details and some best practices like we did in Germany. So one of the questions that was raised was, should the utilities have an integrated approach or should they reduce the scope to a bare minimum? And for us TSOs and DSOs in Germany, we didn't have any choice because the scope was also part of the IT security catalog. And it says that all central and decentral components that are necessary for the secure operation of the grid have to be in scope. So it is somehow a full scope approach. But in the years after the first certification that you make in 2015, the benefit of this full scope approach is pretty clear for us. As Stefano also already described, the ISO is a management system, and you have to understand your own company to put it in place. So it's really a risk-based approach. So you focus first on the most important or the highest risks you do have in your company and the most critical processes. And afterwards go more into detail and the not so critical processes. We do have a continued improvement process, which is also an important part of the standard, as Stefano also mentioned. And we're gaining in a maturity, an increase in the maturity level every year and step by step. And to be honest, when you ask me if I'm really able to exclude something from the scope, because it's not important for my company, it would be really hard to identify something which is not in scope. So we do have the full scope approach here in Germany, and for me it makes completely sense, because when you have a look at Annex A of the ISO standard, you see almost every part of the company is dealt with. You have, for example, personal security, you do have security, physical security, you have BCM crisis management. So the ISO itself includes almost every part of the company. And so why don't have a really large scope to include everything and and put the security topic more into the company's DNA. So makes sense for me. And another question was that was raised in the beginning was, which version of the standard should utility select? And my answer would always be the newest one within a transition period. In Germany, we also started with the 2005 because when we started, there was no translation into the German standard, into a DIN standard at that time. So we started with 2005 and had this transition period to change to 2013. But just to give you an overview from the ISO perspective, the ISO standards are reviewed after they are released at least every 3 years and can be confirmed unchanged, revised. or reviewed by the experts. And for example, the 27001 2013 was at least confirmed in the end of 2018 in the meeting there. So it will take another 3 years until we're going to check if we'll keep it confirmed unchanged, revised or reviewed again. And then it takes about 3 to 4 years, sometimes even longer, until the ISO committee has a new version of the standard which is conformed and has gone through the whole ISO process for this. Pretty complicated. That would be a topic for another webinar, I guess, because it's really not that easy to understand how ISO is working. Yeah, it's complicated. So don't be afraid that even if a standard which is was published in 2013, it will last another, let me think, it will last at least at 2023 unchanged. For you as a hint, Stefano already mentioned it. We're in Germany, and I would suggest it to everyone from the energy utility industry are also using the 27019, which is the information security controls for the energy utility industry. And this is extremely helpful because the ISO 27001 is a good standard. It was formally made for IT, but it's not only applicable to IT, it's applicable to OT as well. But sometimes there are some special things that are only existing the way they exist in the OT and in energy utilities. I pointed out 2 examples. You all know that the lifespan of IT and OT systems is much longer than in a fancy modern data center. We do have sometimes components that are in place for 30 years or even longer. And therefore, the existing controls from NXA from the 27001 are extended in the 27019. And there are special controls and special additions to the controls that can be applied for legacy systems, for example. So I copied it out. You can read it afterwards. I don't want to read it out. And there's an implementation guidance, how you can implement that for your OT systems. The same thing, for example, is for password regulations. You all know that you can't change the password of a substation component every 3 weeks, for example, and you should better not use 10 numbers, and some systems can't even deal with those password regulations you sometimes do have in IT. So here the control gives some additional guidance on passwords in the energy utility industry. So it's also it's always worth to have a look in the 27019 when it comes to the energy utility industry. Have a closer look there. Pretty interesting standard in my point of view. So we've already heard something from Stefano regarding what an audit looks like, or what an auditor has to fulfill. And yeah, for us, an auditor was not like an auditor, unfortunately. Because first of all, I thought, when I thought of audits, I thought of the IT auditors I already know. I made many audits in my company for IT, and I know that most of the 27001 auditors did not have that much experience in the OT sector. But there, unfortunately, our regulator knows that as well. And so he published a conformity assessment program for the accreditation of certification bodies for the IT security catalog. And unfortunately, that means that the auditors for us on energy utility industries in Germany have to fulfill some more requirements than the normal IT auditor has. The auditors have to undergo a training on the fundamentals of grid-based energy supply with gas and electricity. And I also made this training. It was a 2 weeks training, hands-on, 2 weeks full-time, with a test afterwards. It was not that easy.
Christiane, I think I think you cut out a little bit. We might have lost her. We could kind of hear you, but we lost your presentation.
Okay, perfect. I'm in the office, so normally there should not be that many interruptions. Wait a second, I'll try to share it again.
Okay. While we wait for Christiane to pull up her presentation, we do have a poll that you could find at the bottom of your screen for the participants to fill out by the end of the webinar. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. So it looks like we got your presentation back up online. So go ahead, Christiane.
Okay, I told that I already did the auditors training. It was pretty much work. And to check the scope and risk analysis according to the IT security catalog, the audit team must call in a specialist, and he had to study something like mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, and had to have at least 3 years of relevant professional experience in grid-based energy supply. So those guys really know where to look for during an audit, and they really know what to do. So it was not that easy to go through such an audit, but on the other hand, was a nice chance because they really can show you where your weaknesses are in the organization. Because this is something most people forget during an audit. It's not only to point out where you made some mistakes, but also to show you where chances of improvement are. So they know what to show, and it was pretty hard. The calculation of an audit time for us was done by ISO 27006. To give you an example, in my company, I'm responsible for our 9 biggest DSOs. All of the 9 biggest DSOs in our company do have 1,000 employees or more, and only by the number of employees. You can see in the table, which is in the slide, that you have at least 19 audit days or above. To give you a concrete example, our biggest DSO, the Westnet, has about 8,000 employees, a high complexity factor, and about 20 different site types, from unmanned substation to grid control centers, which leads to an audit time of 32 days of certification audit, which was very, very hard to manage at first. We did it afterwards in a parallel audit session, so that they had 3 auditors for a 10-day period, but at first they really made a 30 days audit, and it was very ambitious to do so. Here in those diagrams, you can see how the audit time is calculated for us. It's also part of the certification scheme. I already mentioned the slide before, and you can see that it's pretty clearly structured how many audit days there are. A smaller company, for example, with only 100 or 50 employees, has a much shorter audit time there. Okay, after those audits, even after those audits and the long audit time, when I talk to the colleagues in the grid companies, they really see the benefits of the ISO certification. Because Stefano already told that the management attention and the leadership commitment to the ISO is a very, very important part, and it's one of the main parts of the body of the ISO standard itself. And in the past, we really had problems to get budget for cybersecurity or get the management interested in cybersecurity topics, because it's nothing you can get a quick win out. It's something, some add-on costs, and with involving the management in those whole management system, it's pretty much easier for us to get the management attention as well as the budget. And as Stefano also mentioned, we do have and level of security within our company's DNA that is continuously rising. So you're never ready with making things secure, but it's in process and it's in continual process. And this is something which is also implied by the ISO certification, because you have the recertification, you have the surveillance audit, and it's a never-ending process. Very, very important. You can really react fast on new threats and vulnerabilities because you have the risk-based approach. You don't have the common criteria thing where you have a control for everything and just tick the box and everything is fine. And you do have those extended standards like the 27019 that are giving additional guidance for how to perform things, how to put controls into place. So this is why we do see the benefits of ISO, and we do also still see the benefits of the certification, even if it's mandatory. The mandatoriness due to the law just gave us a chance to convince the management more quickly. So because they had to fulfill it, but now we see that we do have a baseline level of security between all gas and electricity grid providers in Germany, and it is approved by auditors, which are really independent. And the similar scope makes also the certification comparable, because with ISO you can do funny things with a very small scope, but due to the thing that we do have a common scope in Germany, it's absolutely comparable. And a real benefit we do also see is that the certificate can be used to fulfill security requirements within the supply chain. For example, against TSOs, that because they are accepting the certificate from us DSOs as evidence that a baseline level of security is achieved. So we don't need any extra audits there, and that's a pretty good achievement for us. Yeah, and the continual improvement, I can only mention it again, is something very important as well, because we're really improving from year to year. So very important thing. And the way forward, Stefano already mentioned it a little bit. This was something, the first slide I gave to you were examples from Germany. In the European Union, we do not have comparable legislations in place. Every country has a different legislation. And at the moment, we're writing the network code on cybersecurity by the European Commission. It was part of the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, and we started in 2018 to set up a network code on cybersecurity. And as you can see in this pretty nice picture, the ISO IEC certification will also be an important pillar or important part of the network code on cybersecurity as well. At the moment, we're arguing if it will be a mandatory certification or not. But in my opinion, also by the example of Germany, where it's already working pretty good, it's a nice chance to have a common approach on security in the European Union in the future. So this is just something ahead. When it comes to the network code on cybersecurity, it will be published in 2021, 2022. So we're really looking forward, and we will decide how to go on with the certification topic for the network code on cybersecurity very soon. And this is it from my side. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them now or afterwards. I'm always interested in answering them or give you some information how we do it in Germany or even in Europe, because E.ON is working in the whole European Union. And I can give you some more insights, but due to the time we do have here, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And I think that was super helpful, the way that you laid everything out and gave us a good perspective on the utility side. So again, if you haven't done the poll yet, please do so. let me just bring up my presentation again. We do have several questions coming in from everyone. Our first one was for nuclear facilities, which standards would apply to those facilities? Stefano, you might be better poised to answer this one.
Yeah, I help you on that. Okay, for nuclear facilities, we have the IEC 62645. It's mentioned in the ISO 27019 at page 4. In addition to that, I would suggest if you are looking for something comprehensive, you may look to the International Agency for Energy, International Atomic Energy Agency, that is in Vienna, and they have other standards that they would suggest. One last point on this question. You don't talk about, usually you don't talk about certification for nuclear facilities, but you talk, and you don't talk about audits, but you talk more about inspections, because those are mandated by the nuclear authorities, but they use standards as we do through the audit.
Excellent. And we have a question for Christian. Are there any areas where you believe that your organization should go beyond the ISO requirements?
The good thing is that there are no real ISO requirements because it's a risk-based standard, and you're doing the risk-based approach, and you're doing risk analysis on your processes. And therefore, the requirements you put in place or the controls you put in place are also always based on the risk you have identified in your own processes. So it's not a standard that says you have just tick the box and you're fine. But you have to check if the measures you put in place are enough to reduce the risk as much as you wanted to, because this is something that comes with the ISO philosophy. It's different from just a tick the box standard. So it's risk based, and therefore you can't do more or less because it's based on your risk analysis.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And Stefano, we have a question regarding this. Would there be any areas which you think ISO standards should be changed or expanded?
Let's say it's pretty comprehensive and it serves a wide range of purposes, almost all the businesses. So I would say, like it's now, it is most probably the best it can be done with 114 controls. There is one area that people argue if it should be better explained, and it's on the newspapers, on the cybersecurity newspapers every day. It's about supply chain and value chain and how to tackle those things. But I keep telling people that most probably ISO 27001, it cannot be that comprehensive at that level, and it would be way too complex. That would be one area, but as I said, partially it is there. So I need to admit that if you read it carefully and if you are wise enough, there are some aspects, not all aspects, that most probably some auditors, especially on energy, may want to see on the long run. But it's not something that anyway it's going to change, in my personal opinion. It would be just enlarging the scope to a level that would just disrupt completely the full ISO 27001.
And Christian, do you have any areas which you would expand or change in the ISO standards?
Something we should improve is exactly what Stefano says. This is supply chain thing. It is part of the ISO standard, but there are not that clear regulations inside. There are standards that give more regulations for supply chain management, and this is something where I see weaknesses within the standard series. But overall, I think it's a pretty pretty good and pretty good developed standard. And yeah, I think it's one of the best standards, to be honest, to set a minimum level of security in a company. And maybe supply chain is something we're gonna deal with in the next revision of the standard.
May I add something? Do you mind?
Yeah,
Because
no, go ahead.
one thing that I wanted to add, and it came to my mind, one thing that for sure it will have to change when we will have, for example, quantum cryptography is the part about cryptography, because the cryptography as we know right now would not work anymore in the same way and with the same things. But I know that there was something ongoing also on that, and that is something that it's related to the updates of the standard. So you would for sure see that as soon as those topics will emerge and will be used on a wide set of markets, it would be changed and it will be kept up to speed.
Absolutely, there are new standards on cryptography at the moment, but they're in a different working group. And I don't think that they will really be part of 27001, because this is more the management part and cryptography is more specialized. So there are new standards upcoming on cryptography.
And kind of going off that, you guys talked a lot about the benefits of these standards, but for small companies, the certification process, is kind of expensive. How much resources should companies allocate to pass this certification?
I start, if you don't mind, Christiana. I tell you just one true story that I learned by myself. We had a small company of 2 people that wanted to be certified ISO 27001 because they had an obligation with the government. They were really 2 people, just husband and wife. And the point is that they had just 3 processes. They spent for the certification. The auditor is the same auditor that have been auditing me. So I mean, I can testify that he moved from a company of 2 to a company of simply, let's say, now we are 160. What is interesting is that he told to me it was extremely simple for them to do it when they understood the logic and the philosophy of all this system. And the problem is exactly that small companies usually are specialized, have less processes. It may not cost as in the case of Christiana, it may cost much less, and also the effort is much less. And in that case, I still remember that he told me the wife was writing the processes and procedures, and when I came, it was the only time in which I got there, and I had all the processes written down, somebody who could explain, and that wrote and understood, because simply she knew exactly what she was doing in her daily job. And as you say, it doesn't really depend if you are small or big. It depends, for example, on the number of processes or the number of products you deliver. And you can achieve it even with 2 people. So I'm pretty sure that organizing work, and also don't put it in a time frame of doing it tomorrow. Think that this is a process that may take you between 1 and 2 years, even for big organizations. The one we audited yesterday is one of the national regulators in Europe. They took almost 2 years to prepare everything, but it was simply excellent. So I mean, it can take whatever you want, and you can organize. This is also the beauty of the system, I would say.
Thank you, Stefano, for that anecdote, and I think that helps our audience a lot. Christian, do you have any further comments on the question?
I totally agree. I should have chosen another example of a small company we do have, because the smaller the company, the easier the processes they are, the less processes they do have, and the less audit time it comes out to in an end. So we do also have 10 people company with no full-time employee on security, and they also managed to do the certification, because they are much less complex than a big DSO is. So I would totally agree with Stefano.
Excellent. And I'm just going to ask two final questions because we did run a little bit over time. But you know, regarding the benefits of these standards, how would like the average cybersecurity professional, how would they make the case or persuade their CIO, CISO to kind of go forth and implement these standards?
I can tell you the way I did it. And it's very simple. I took out the list of incidents, of security incidents we had before, and I just asked my management, do we want to do something better? And I said, the only option I have is just to apply something that everybody can understand, and something that can help us to get better in the right path and to measure things. Mm-hmm. Because the other point is that ISO allows you then to measure if you are doing better, and not simply saying you are doing better and you can tick the box. But I can say, okay, now I have 3 incidents less in comparison to the first quarter or to the previous quarter. I use that method. There are many methods that you may use, I suspect. This was the one I used, but that also it created awareness among the management. They understood that I had in mind something, and that I had to do something based on something they could control. They were confident. Mm-hmm. The process, and this is something that I think that you as sponsor of this project need to sell to your own management, because you know how they will act and how they will wait whatever you are saying. For us it was just this, and honestly I had better ways, meaning that we are bound by a lot of compliance in the office, so I would have simply had the need to say we need to comply because of this legislation. I prefer to be fair and to explain this is going to help us in this aspect, and this is what I can achieve.
Mm-hmm. And Christian, do you have any recommendations on how to persuade the high level management?
After something happens, after you had a security incident or something like that, then you have the management attention, but it's too late. In Germany, they used the Ukraine crisis for the IT security law to put it through. It always works when you show some risks or something that really happened. But for me, I think involving the management and showing how the continual improvement takes place, and how you can, how security can be part of your company's DNA. Convincing the management by giving an example and showing the KPIs that are getting better and better, it always helps to convince the management, especially the KPIs, and seeing how many of the controls are in place already. That helps to convince, and that helps to get some budget for other measures. Mm-hmm. So that helped me.
Gotcha. And for our final question, it's a 2-part question regarding digitization and grid modernization and integrating renewables. So as more renewables are added to the grid and it becomes difficult to separate the transmission system from the distribution system, how do you see ISO addressing this change? And as we transition to more digitization, how will the standards address many foreign connections to the grid?
ISO is not a DSO or TSO standard. You can use it for almost everything, and that makes it pretty adaptable to the changing situation in the digitalization. That's again the risk-based approach. When you add more connections to your grid, whether from renewables or from I don't know what else, the risk changes, or the thing, the risk analysis you have to make changes, and therefore the controls you have to put in place are changing. ISO does not have to adopt to the situation, to the digitalization, because it's you during the process and based on the philosophy the ISO standard has, it's you're changing the risk analysis and you're changing the controls you put in place. So you don't have to change the standard because it's part of the philosophy of the standard that the situation may change. So it's a different approach. We don't need other controls. It's part of the standard to review the risk situation and to change the risk analysis based on that.
Mm-hmm. And Stefano, any further thoughts?
Yeah, on the second part, we are going to spread this among the customers that become prosumers at the end of the day. I would say that for that ISO don't have a good answer right now. From one side, TSOs and DSOs are changing and adapting to the risk that they encounter. But I think also that we need to be cautious that ISO 27001 is part of a bigger, let's say, basket of standards. And in that case, I think that we need to create a mix of standards that would fit with the needs. In the United States, and I keep saying this because I miss it in Europe, unfortunately, you have NIST that is doing an excellent job with the full framework. I think that ISO 27001 is the first standard I would consider as basics, but Christiane can tell you that during the network code, we have been talking about other standards that would help aspects like this one. So the 62443, for example, that may tackle some aspects, or somebody mentioned before in the chat, the 62351. And by the way, those standards are done sometimes by the same people who work on ISO 27001. So they have, let's say, a heuristic view on this, and they know exactly that you cannot tackle all aspects by ISO 27001, but you would need more a mix of standards when the market will move towards, let's say, a digitalization that will bring consumers closer, let's say, to DSOs and TSOs at the end of the day. So I think that we shouldn't stop here with ISO 27000. We should more look to other things that can sort those kind of issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both so much for your anecdotes and stories. I think they were super helpful and hopefully insightful to our audience to help give them a better perspective and try to help implement these standards. I listed my contact information on a slide. If any of the participants have any suggestions, recommendations, feedback, please feel free to email me. But other than that, thank you for joining us for this webinar. Please join us next week, 9:30 on Thursday, for another webinar on data protection policies and practices. Again, we will be posting a recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint presentations on our website. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week and weekend. Stay safe, everyone.